The city had no name anymore. Once, it was called Therine, a proud capital built upon the crystalline cliffs of Daranox Prime, known across 6 systems for its luminous towers and harmonic sky bridges that pulsed in tune with the planet's ionosphere. Now it lay in ruins, an ashen memory wrapped in the whimper of winds and the roars of things that should not have existed. Zara crouched beneath the collapsed spine of a transport rail, one arm wrapped tightly around her youngest child. The boy, Corin, no older than 4 cycles, didn't cry anymore. He had learned not to. In Therine, sound invited death. Above them, her daughter Lyra watched the street from a shattered second-floor window, her tiny frame still, breath silent, eyes too sharp for someone barely 7. Zara whispered a short pulse in their tongue, 3 notes only their people could hear. Still. Hide. Wait. Monsters were hunting again. No one knew what the war had awakened. Some said the blast waves from orbital bombardment had torn open long-buried laboratories. Others believed the planet's core had been poisoned, birthing twisted creatures from the molten dark. What mattered was that now, in the skeleton of a once mighty city, the predators had no fear of concrete or steel. Zara's stomach ached with hunger. They hadn't eaten since yesterday's rainwater catch, a foul mix of soot and nutrient runoff that had made Corin ill. She dared not search for food until nightfall. The last time she tried, she barely escaped a scaled thing that moved like smoke and smiled like it remembered being a man. She no longer prayed. The gods of her people had been silent since the sky turned red. Her husband, Dalon, had died early in the invasion, torn apart while guiding a group of elders to shelter. There had been no body to bury, just his boots left at the threshold of the temple, smoldering. Since then it had been only her and the children, each day spent scavenging, hiding, surviving. Zara adjusted her hold on Corin, pressing her lips to his temple. He was hot. Too hot. Fever was rising again. She needed medicine, real water, anything. But all she had was cracked skin, a rusted blade, and 2 children who trusted her without question. A sound rumbled through the street above, not the bellow of beasts. Something lower, more mechanical. She tensed. Movement followed. Metal on stone. The whine of a small anti-grav unit adjusting under load. Her heart stopped. This was no scavenger's cart, and no monster made that sound. Someone was approaching. She clutched Corin closer and whistled low. Lyra dropped down without a word, eyes burning with alertness. Zara turned toward the broken doorframe, hand trembling on the hilt of her dull blade. Whoever it was had stepped into the lion's den of Daranox's hell. And she would not let her children die in front of her. Captain John Riker hated planets that groaned. Daranox Prime was groaning. Every creak of its metal bones, every distant scream of wind through ruined towers, felt like a dying beast dragging itself toward extinction. He'd been dropped on planets before, but this one? This one made your skin itch and your soul whisper, leave. But the mission wasn't reconnaissance anymore. It had started that way. Earth's interstellar forces had tasked Riker with surveying old colony sites for salvage. He was used to it. One man, a battered exosuit, a pulse rifle older than some officers, and a head full of instinct. But it changed when his drones pinged something unexpected. Life signs, not the flickering chaos of monsters. Not the dissonant signatures of radiation-borne horrors, real, steady vitals, weak, clustered, children. So he disobeyed protocol and rerouted. Now, he stood in the courtyard of what had once been a residential hub, rifle lowered but ready, visor adjusting to the light bleeding through fractured towers. Around him, silence waited like a predator. He moved with caution, every step measured, every corner treated like the mouth of a cave. Then came the whisper of motion, below the rail spine, small, too small to be a beast. He paused, crouched low, adjusted thermal scan. 3 shapes, human-like. But not Terran. His grip on the rifle tightened. He knew this game. Cornered people were more dangerous than the things that hunted them. Riker disengaged his helmet's auto-seal, lifted it just enough to show his face. He raised one hand, the other holding his weapon low. "I'm not here to hurt you," he called softly. "I'm here because I saw you. You're not alone anymore." A pause. Then the rustle of stone and grit as someone emerged from the shadow. She was taller than he expected, gaunt but poised. Shoulders back, blade drawn, stance low. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dust light, deep teal patterned with old tribal markings across her arms. Eyes violet and unreadable. A mother lion ready to kill. Behind her, two children clung to silence like lifelines. Riker didn't lower his gaze. The woman's blade remained steady. "You're Terran," she said, voice hoarse. "I am." "Why are you here?" "Because you're still breathing," he replied. She said nothing, but her eyes flickered. He knelt slowly, placing the rifle on the ground between them. "I can get you out," he said. "There's a med station 4 clicks east. Reinforced walls, clean water, food, safe." "How do I know you're not lying?" she asked. "You don't." "Then why trust you?" "Because," Riker said, his voice quiet but firm, "if I wanted to kill you, I wouldn't be talking." Her blade dipped a centimeter. A long breath passed between them, and in that moment, the last fire of her defiance didn't burn out. It shifted. She turned slightly, glanced at her children, then she stepped forward. Just one step. But for Captain John Riker, it was enough. The mission had changed again. Now, it was about 3 lives, and nothing else. The ruins of Thureen had a way of swallowing sound. Each footstep echoed strangely off crumbled marble, jagged steel, and shattered glass, then vanished into silence. That silence, once a cruel guardian of monsters, now wrapped itself around the 4 of them like a tight, uneasy blanket. Zara walked slightly behind the human, her children close at her side. She still didn't fully trust him, not yet. But trust was a luxury she'd long been without, and Riker, his name came from the clipped introduction he gave before handing Corin a purified hydration vial, hadn't flinched when she drew her blade or snapped when she challenged his directions. That counted for something. He moved with the careful grace of a man who'd walked through too many death zones and lived to map them in his bones. His gear was worn, not polished, his rifle silent but always angled toward danger. When Zara had asked where his team was, he just said, "Dead, mostly. Some left. Some didn't have the chance." There was no sorrow in it, only fact. They moved through a collapsed monorail tunnel, the filtered blue sunlight slicing through overhead gaps, dust motes swirling in the beams like ghosts. Every few meters, Riker would stop and scan. At one point, he raised a hand and crouched low. Zara followed instinctively, pressing the children flat behind a pile of broken conduit. Then she heard it. Something large. Breathing. A heavy drag of limbs on stone. Wet clicks. Hungry. Zara's pulse thundered. Lyra's small fingers dug into her tunic. Corin didn't move at all. His fever had dulled him too much, and that terrified her. Riker motioned for them to stay. He moved without sound, slipping into shadow like he was born of it. She watched him disappear into the side corridor, heart pounding. Then the noise grew louder, snarls, claws scraping. A roar that sounded like metal drowning in its own blood. Then a shot, and another, followed by silence. Moments later, Riker returned, his shoulder lightly smeared with ichor. He didn't explain, just wiped his blade against his leg and nodded. "Clear." They continued. The sun moved slowly above them, casting long slats of golden light through the wreckage. Time felt broken here. The shadows always seemed one step behind. Zara whispered songs to Corin, sometimes to herself as they walked. Not lullabies, not anymore, just old things, rhythms to keep her soul from fraying. Riker after a while asked softly, "What were you, before all this?" She hesitated. Then, "An astronomer. I studied light, the way it bends through gravity wells." He turned his head, briefly impressed. "Stars and monsters. You've walked both." Zara gave a bitter smile. "They're not that different." He said nothing after that, but she saw him glance at her more often. Not warily, thoughtfully. And when Corin stumbled, Riker scooped him up with quiet strength, resting the boy against his armored chest like it was second nature. That was the first time she truly looked at him, not as a threat, not as a tool, but as something rarer. A man who could carry weight without needing to announce it. By dusk, the cityscape had thinned into the jagged remnants of the industrial district. Half-toppled smokestacks leaned like the bones of giants against the haze-stained sky. The further they walked, the louder the planet's true voice became. Low groans from beneath the ground, shifts of tectonic plates still unsettled from the war. They paused near a sunken courtyard, flanked by shattered transport skiffs. Riker motioned them into the hollow shell of an old command pod, its walls scorched but intact. Inside, it smelled of rust and sand and long-dead circuitry. He checked the perimeter, then sealed the door. Zara laid Corin down on a folded emergency wrap Riker handed her. His skin was damp with fever, his lips cracked. "I need cold," she whispered, brushing sweat from the boy's brow. "His body's burning." Riker knelt beside her, opened a side pouch and withdrew a cooling pack, cracked it, and slid it under Corin's back. Zara's breath caught. "Thank you." Riker didn't reply. He only watched the child with something in his eyes that made her stomach twist. She sat back against the wall, fatigue clawing at her. Lyra curled up beside her, silent but awake, always watching, always measuring. After a moment, Riker finally sat too. "You lost your mate," he said. Not as a question. Zara nodded. "Early. He died saving fools who wouldn't run." Riker didn't react. "That sounds familiar." She tilted her head, studying him. "And you? What did you lose?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, "My reason, until today." Zara blinked. Riker continued, voice quieter. "I've seen too many bodies, too many monsters. I forgot what it looked like when someone still had something left to fight for." Their eyes met in the dim blue glow of his shoulder lamp, and something in her chest, long frozen by grief and terror, stirred. They sat together for hours, barely speaking, the children drifting to sleep between them. Outside, the howls of Daranox's twisted night things began to rise. But inside the pod, for the first time in what felt like years, Zara didn't feel like prey. She felt watched over. And it terrified her. Because for the first time, she didn't want to be alone. Morning rose over Daranox in bloody hues, streaking across the sky like the aftermath of a forgotten war. The city moaned as if waking from a nightmare, its ruins casting long shadows that seemed to move even when the wind did not. Within those shadows, survival was a razor's breath from extinction. Captain Riker was already up. Zara watched him from inside the pod, her son curled into her lap, Lyra still half asleep with her arm over her mother's leg. Riker stood at the edge of the street with one boot braced on a fallen beam, scanning the horizon through a battered ocular scope. She studied the way he moved, like the planet was always listening, always watching. Even in stillness, his body remained tensed for action. But what struck her most wasn't his readiness. It was the solitude in it. She stepped out, careful not to wake the children, and walked up beside him. The air was dry but heavy with the scent of scorched metal and fungal bloom. Monsters hunted in this region, they always had, but Riker hadn't turned back once. "How far to the station?" she asked. 4 kilometers, he replied. "But we'll have to go through the bridge district. It's the only route that's not crawling with scav beasts." Zara folded her arms, nodding slowly. "The bones." He gave her a sideways look. "You know it?" Everyone on Daranox knew the bridge district. Before the war, it was lined with statues of our ancestors, figures carved from bone glass to remind us of where we came from. When the siege began, the first mass executions happened there. The bones became real. Riker was silent for a moment. "They didn't mention that in the briefing." "Earth doesn't read what it burns," she replied coldly. He didn't argue. Instead, he returned his gaze to the skyline. "We'll move at first light. The things in the tunnels sleep just after dawn. If we're quiet, we can make it across before they wake." She nodded. "Corin is weak. I can carry him." Riker turned to her. "No, I will." She was about to argue, but there was something in his voice. Not dominance, not pity, just conviction. She nodded again. They moved within the hour, Riker lifting Corin with one fluid motion, cradling him against his armored chest like a man used to carrying fragile burdens. Lyra walked beside her mother, always looking behind them, a watchful guardian in a child's body. The bridge district appeared like a scar across the earth, a long expanse of broken archways and sunken statues, many shattered into ash from orbital blasts. Bone glass glinted in the cracked pavement, and skeletal forms, some sculpted, some once living, lined the walkway like forgotten sentinels. Zara felt every footstep like a betrayal. Here, her mother had marched in protest. Here, her uncle had died with 20 others whose names were never carved. The wind howled between the crumbled supports, carrying with it the groans of the dead and the barely awake. Halfway across, the silence broke. A low chitter, a scraping, then another. Riker stopped. He lowered Corin gently behind a fractured statue and raised his rifle. "Don't move," he whispered. Zara pulled Lyra to her, shielding her with her cloak, her eyes sweeping the shadows ahead. Then they came. From beneath the bridge, through shattered stone and sewer grates, black-skinned, tendrilled things with bulbous limbs and faces that didn't remember ever being faces. Their mouths hissed open, rows of teeth twitching like blades. Zara didn't scream. She didn't have time. Because Riker opened fire, He moved like war, no wasted bullets, no panic, just controlled fury. He dropped two of the beasts before they cleared the railing, then spun left and drove the butt of his rifle into another as it lunged from the rubble. Blood like tar sprayed across his visor. The creatures shrieked, lunged, scattered. Zara reached for her blade, standing between the monsters and her children, but Riker was already moving, drawing them to him, away from the boy, away from her. He was being torn at. One of the creatures caught his arm, tore a gash through his shoulder guard. Still, he didn't fall. Still, he didn't let them reach her. Zara saw it in one brutal instant, what it meant for a soldier to fight without hesitation for people he'd known for less than 2 days. He didn't need a reason. Only a choice. And he had made it. She moved, cutting through one that tried to flank him, her blade slicing under its chin with precision born of desperation. Lyra picked up a stone and threw it at another beast crawling toward them. Riker surged forward again, this time driving his knee into the chest of the final creature and firing point blank into its gullet. Silence followed, except for their breathing. The bridge, once littered with ghosts, now had a few more. But they were the ones still standing. They made camp in a collapsed mezzanine above an old SkyTrain station. The children lay curled together under a thermal blanket, Corin resting against Lyra's shoulder. Zara sat beside them, rubbing dried blood from her arms, trying not to remember how warm it had been. Riker sat opposite her, his sleeve torn, shoulder exposed, red seeping into the gauze he'd hastily wrapped. Zara crossed to him. "Let me." He didn't protest. She knelt and unwound the gauze, cleaning the wound with practiced care, her fingers steady even as her lips tightened. "You should have let me help sooner." "I was trained to ignore pain," he muttered. She met his eyes. "I wasn't asking what you were trained for." He almost smiled. "You fought well back there," he said, quieter now. "Your blade work, you weren't just an astronomer." She hesitated. "My husband taught me, said the stars don't matter if you can't protect the ones under them." Riker's gaze lingered on her. "You protected them today." Her hands paused. "So did you." His eyes didn't leave hers. "I always thought the job was about orders, following them, breaking them. Didn't matter. But this, protecting you, your kids, this feels like the first thing that makes sense." Zara swallowed but didn't speak. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she did. And it scared her. Because in the middle of a burning world, amid monsters and grief and endless loss, someone had looked at her like she was worth dying for, and hadn't flinched. She leaned forward, rested her forehead gently against his. No kiss, no need. Just presence, just breath shared in the dark. And somewhere outside, beneath a sky shattered by war, a wind passed through the bones of the dead, and did not touch the fire that still burned. At first light, the clouds broke open, not with rain, but with sky fire. Duranox's weather was as cursed as its soil. The upper atmosphere, corrupted by chemical bombardment and plasma fusion fallout, often sparked with violent arcs of lightning that rained down without warning. The bolts didn't start fires. They ended them, turning matter to vapor in a second. Riker had seen ships vanish mid-descent in the blink of an eye. That morning, the sky fire began early. Riker rose from the rubble beside the children, his rifle slung across his back, the wound in his shoulder stiff but sealed. Zara already stood at the edge of the mezzanine, scanning the horizon beyond the train wreckage. Her silhouette was carved against a flickering sky, elegant even in ash and dirt. He moved beside her without a word. She pointed into the distance where the curvature of a sealed dome could be seen rising faintly through the haze. "The outpost?" she asked. Riker nodded. 3 kilometers. Last Terran beacon came from that structure. Reinforced med bay, power cells, defense grids. If it's still intact, we'll make it. She gave a slow, pained breath. "Then we go." But it wasn't just distance in their way. Between them and the outpost stretched the Harrow vents, an old geothermal scar now cracked open by orbital shelling, where acidic steam billowed and creatures of the deep crawled in and out of the crevices. Nothing could fly over it, and very little ever crossed it alive. Riker knew that. But he also knew something else. There was no turning back. He carried Corin again, cradling the feverish boy with one arm while keeping his rifle gripped in the other. Lyra took point beside her mother, sharp-eyed and unnervingly quiet. They descended from the mezzanine and entered the ruins that bled into the edge of the Harrow. The air changed instantly. The wind hissed, the ground breathed. Steam hissed from glowing vents between broken stones, and the stench of sulfur and rot filled every lungful of air. Creatures shifted in the fog, legless things, eyeless things, slithering close then darting away again. Riker kept the pace tight, always listening, always scanning. At one point, the ground cracked beneath Lyra's foot. Zara caught her before she fell through. But something else heard. A shriek rose from the mist. A dozen shrieks answered. They weren't alone. Riker turned just in time to see a clawed creature leap from a fissure in the rocks, its body laced with chitinous armor, its mouth spread wide into a vertical slash of teeth. He dropped Corin behind a wrecked crate, raised his rifle, and opened fire. The first beast died instantly. But more came. Zara moved with speed and grace, her blade flashing like heat lightning. She spun, sliced, turned again. Lyra fought beside her, small and precise, stabbing with a broken metal rod as Riker gunned down creature after creature. But it wasn't enough. A massive beast surged from the chasm, twice the size of the others, its skin fused with metallic plates. It roared, and the earth shook beneath it. Riker shouted, pushing Zara and Lyra back toward the shelter of the cliff. He fired until the clip clicked empty. The beast didn't fall. He threw the rifle aside, reached down, and pulled free a fragmentation charge from his belt. Zara's voice cracked through the chaos. "No, don't!" But Riker had already started to run. He sprinted straight at the creature, the charge in hand, dodging the lunge of claws and teeth. As the beast turned to devour him, he slid under its belly and jammed the charge between the plates beneath its ribs. Then he rolled. The explosion shook the valley. The creature collapsed in a splatter of blackened gore. When the smoke cleared, Zara ran to him. He was alive, bloodied, burned, but breathing, and as he looked up at her face, her hands clutching his, her eyes wide with panic and something deeper, he smiled. "You're still alive," he rasped. "You reckless, broken man," she whispered. He laughed once, then passed out. They reached the outpost as the sun began to fall. Zara carried Corin now, her arms tight around his frail body. Riker leaned heavily on Lyra's shoulder, one eye swollen, blood crusting his lips. The outpost loomed ahead, its dome cracked but still standing, its gates sealed shut with rusted reinforcement panels. No lights, no guards, no power. Zara's hope, so carefully rebuilt, cracked in her chest. She lowered Corin onto a stone and ran to the console by the gate. She punched in commands, symbols, override codes. Nothing worked. The system was dead. Lyra held her brother's hand, watching quietly as his breathing grew weaker. Riker sat down slowly beside a collapsed tower. "Give me 5 minutes." "You can't stand," Zara snapped, tears threatening now. 5 minutes, he repeated. He pulled a multi-tool from his pack and actually crawled to the access terminal beside the dome's gate. His fingers moved slow, but with purpose. Wires were exposed. Sparks flashed. Something hummed deep in the earth. Zara fell to her knees beside him. "You can't save us with sparks and hope." Riker looked at her, pale and burning and still smiling. "You already saved yourself, Zara. I'm just finishing what you started." Then the gate shuttered. Lights flickered on, metal scraped as the doors began to part, and behind them, air, clean, pure, pressurized. They rushed inside, medical drones activated. The lights bathed them in gold. Corin was laid in the recovery unit, and Lyra curled beside him exhausted. Zara stood over them, her hand on her daughter's hair, her other trembling over her son's chest. Riker collapsed onto a bench near the med wall, his head falling back, eyes fluttering shut. Zara turned to him at last. He looked like hell, but to her in that moment, he was radiant. "You don't know us," she whispered. "You didn't have to do any of this." He cracked one eye open. "I did it because monsters don't deserve the last word." She walked to him, slow, careful, still unsure if she was dreaming. "You could have died." He reached out, touched her hand, calloused and worn and still trembling. "But I didn't." And then she sat beside him, leaned her head on his shoulder, and let herself, at last, begin to breathe. Because they were safe. Because the fire hadn't gone out. Because a soldier had seen them, and stayed. In the quiet hum of the outpost's medical wing, time bent. Machines clicked softly. Drones buzzed and whirred in neat, circular patterns as they administered treatments Zara had only heard about in passing tales before the war. Corin lay cocooned in warmth, saline lines and nanite tubes wrapped around his thin arms. His fever had broken sometime in the night. Zara sat by his side, watching his chest rise and fall with the calm rhythm of sleep. Every now and then, Lyra would stir from her cot in the adjacent room, come check on her brother, then return to her curled place under thermal sheets like a creature hibernating for the first time in safety. It had been 2 full days since the gate opened. And still, the human soldier had not left. Riker paced the perimeter now and then, checking the power relays and drone inventory, marking every exit and vulnerability like a man who couldn't shake the war out of his bones. He hadn't touched the emergency evac beacon in the control room, hadn't even mentioned it. Not once. Zara watched him from the glass threshold, her hands clasped in front of her, the ache of exhaustion finally dulled by the absence of fear. She stepped into the main room, just as Riker was pulling off his upper chest armor to reveal the fresh sealant bandages laid across his torso. "You're not healing fast enough," she said softly. He glanced at her, expression dry. "I've had worse." She crossed the floor and reached for the med spray on the counter. He didn't stop her when she leaned in and peeled back one of the wrappings, gently misting the gash beneath. "I've seen men try to hide behind words like that," she murmured. "I'm not hiding," Riker replied. "I just don't know how to stop moving." She looked up at him then, searching the truth in his face. "And if you did?" His voice was quiet. "Then I'd have to admit I've finally found something I don't want to lose." The silence stretched between them like a held breath, her hand stilled over his wound. The spray hissed softly. Outside, Lyra's laughter rang faintly from the corridor, followed by Corin's sleep-happy murmur. Zara stepped back. "You could still leave," she said. "The evac ships are waiting. You've done more than anyone could have asked." "I could," he said, "but I won't." And just like that, her chest ached again. Differently. With something she had buried deep in the dust and ruin of Daranox. Hope. Riker stepped toward her, then paused. "I'm not here because of guilt, Zara. Not because you're broken or tragic. I'm here because you fought like hell when the universe forgot you. You're not some cause. You're reason enough." She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stepped forward and placed her forehead against his, her fingers curling around his wrist. And this time there were no monsters outside. Only breath, and warmth, and a moment that neither of them would forget. 2 weeks passed. The outpost thrived in quiet cycles, its lights steady, its systems responding with smooth efficiency to each of Riker's calibrations. The medical wing became a place of laughter. Corin began to walk again, clumsy but certain. Lyra painted images into the dust with her fingers and taught one of the drones to follow her like a pet. Zara, for the first time in years, began to think about things beyond the next hour. She washed her clothes in clean water. She dreamed again of stars and warm places, of silence not filled with terror. She sat by the outpost window at dusk and watched the horizon with a heart that no longer clenched at every sound. Riker built a greenhouse unit from salvaged drone limbs and nutrient gel tanks. He spent his nights reinforcing the outpost defenses, but he also began carving a wooden star for Corin's bedside and helped Lyra map constellations onto the curved dome. One evening, Zara walked into the atrium to find him staring at the communication panel, one hand hovering over the evac request beacon. He didn't press it. Instead, he turned and saw her. "I was going to call it in," he said. "I know, but I didn't." She nodded slowly. "Because you're not done yet." "No," he said, "because I'm already where I was meant to be." She stepped toward him, placing her hand over his. "And if you did call it in," she said softly, "I would have asked you to stay." They stood there, the sun setting beyond the dome in deep gold, and for the first time since Daranox began tearing itself apart, there was nothing left to run from. No war, no monsters, only this. A soldier who chose love over orders, a widow who found strength in surviving, 2 children who would grow up knowing they had been saved, not just rescued. And in the ruins of the galaxy's cruelty, something impossible had taken root. A home.